What an opener that is. What an intro. What a killer tune that is.
Good evening, everybody. All right, we got a great one for you tonight here. As you can see, it's not Hollywood Squares. It's Guitar Squares. It's Tanner, Chris Gill, myself, Alan Garber, Donnie Ward, and our special guest, Jim Gostad, fresh out of a year and a half of bringing us Tonex magic.
Of IK Multimedia jail.
Yeah, there you go.
Out of IK Multi jail.
On parole.
Yeah, but not for good behavior. Never.
Yeah. And we're here tonight to celebrate the release of 82-84, Eddie's greatest tone, I might add. I'm sorry, everybody out there. That's my personal favorite. And crazily enough, you would think a cleaner sound like that to get would be easier for you, Jim, but it was the exact opposite, right?
No, Marshall super leads are not made to do that. I mean, when you run them the way they want to be run, they're fizzy and wild and hairy, and getting it clean. You can't just turn the volume down on them. As you know, there's no master volume. There's no such thing as gain. They just do what they do. So yeah, they don't want to do that. They don't want to do clean or cleaner.
So you basically, I mean, you're like a forensic detective. I mean, you really had to be, aside from the tone part of it. I mean, just to get those tones. I mean, you must have. Just the whole load resistor thing. That's amazing to me. It's like that, that you figure that out, and basically, yeah, there you go. The stick of dynamite, whatever you call it,
Right.
I mean, the fact that that he was using it then. I mean, I'm going beyond that. I'm like, well, where did he get that? Was that a Jose thing, or who turned him on to that? Where did that come from?
I don't know exactly where it came from, and I'm certainly not a believer that he was using it early on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's
certainly not that, because there's so much hair in the early. Fair Warning has got so much hair on, and everything pre-Fair Warning. Van Halen 2 is fairly Marshall-esque. I mean, just Marshall's doing Marshalls, but the other ones, and Women and Children First for that matter, but compare that to 1984. Yeah, it's a big difference. It's a huge, even Diver Down. So the pre-release video I did, where I played some cuts from each of the album, each of the Diver Down in 1984, I'm using the load resistor for the whole thing. So I'm using it on the Diver Down cuts too, because it takes a little bit of hair out of it. But from where it came from, I've been playing these amps, like I said in some video, for like 45 years. And that's what we did back in the late 70s, early 80s, trying to quiet the things down. There were a few repair guys around that they would always have load boxes on their workbenches. They'd have variacs and load boxes. That was standard practice. So when they'd bias an amp, they'd run it into a load resistor. Mm-hmm. So I had found a guy, Tom Roberts was his name, repair guy up in Wisconsin, where I came from. And he said, yeah, I know a way I can cut the volume down on that amp for you. And he put a little 50-watt ohmite resistor inside the chassis of a 50-watt four-holer that I had. And it was amazing. It was just like a parallel load, the same thing I did on. So I've known about this for a long, long time. And I have a feeling the same thing happened with Ed, for sure.
Right.
I mean, that's just one of the things, one of the many tools you can use to knock a few dB off of the amp.
What would you say, about 3 dB?
Yeah, it's a guess, but it's like 3 dB. It feels like it's equivalent to pulling a couple output tubes out of a 100 watt. It's about 3 dB.
Right. And I guess it just gets rid of that, some of that high end and the fizz and gets rid of that, cleans it up.
It does. If you have, if you have any familiarity with a dummy load, a straight up dummy load, where you're sucking all the output out of the amp, and then you reamp it through either another Marshall amp or a solid state power amp or whatever. If you don't re-EQ it, it sounds like somebody threw a blanket over it.
Right.
So doing the parallel load doesn't quite do that. It just rounds it out and it takes some of that sizzle out of the amplifier. It takes, like I like to describe it as the string squeaks. When your fingers going up and down the fingerboard and you get that squeaky.
Uh-huh.
Or if you got the presence, if the presence is too hot, set up on the amp, and you get that nasty kind of everything going on, hair everywhere. This just kind of takes it all out of there. It's what you hear. It's what you hear in that tone. It's a more controlled kind of tone.
So when we're talking about 1984 and Diver Down for that matter, I know that you had pointed out that, one of the big things about those albums is a lot of it's in standard tuning or even a little above standard tuning. Alan, you're the
you
guy.
Want to talk to Alan about this?
Yeah, exactly. Right? Alan, chime in. But so how did that make things different for you when you did these two as opposed to the other ones because of the standard tuning?
Well, that's a huge thing about. So much of that sound, so much of that, Fair Warning is about as dark and ratty and nasty as you get. And a lot of that's due to the tuning. Because the amp setup is not great. Through the whole process, the amp setup is not that much different.
Yeah.
It's studio techniques and there are tweaks. There are different things in the amp. There's different miking techniques and everything. There's Fair Warning, most likely the different speaker cabinet, the G1265s. But other than that, it's kind of the same setup. I think it's sometimes, and of course the different Variac settings. I think sometimes he had the entire amp dimed. That's how I did Fair Warning, including volume 2.
Really?
Yeah. So
that's pretty much what I was basic ed was just dime everything.
Everything, right?
Up to a point.
But you don't hear that on Van Halen 1. I'm not hearing that because you're hearing a lot of that bright cap kick in.
Right.
And I always look at that as he's in the studio and he's just the young kid and he's never done studio time and he's in this fabulous studio and these guys are saying, you got to turn it down. That's not how we do it. That's not how we do it. You got to do this. You got to do that. It's too this. It's too that. So I'm sure he got talked into that. And I think, you hear bright cap too in Women and Children First too. I'm hearing it. So but I think those are the only changes. I think the tone knobs presence always full up, everything across the board. It was just volume 1, volume 2, and the amp never jumpered. But volume 2 still works to a point.
Yeah. A little bleed.
You get bleed through that first tube.
Yeah.
So that's how you adjust the warmth on it. And then if you get that full Fair Warning grit, that thick, you combine that with the tuning and it's like, there you go. There's the Fair Warning sound. There's a lot of other things that go into it. Obviously, there's a lot of studio magic that's in there too, but that's the basic amp setup, in my opinion.
So with Diver Down in 1984, even Diver Down, obviously you can hear it too. It seems a little cleaner, as we're going in the timeline here. The pickup in the Frankenstein. So you think it was the same pickup? Yeah, you do. Okay.
I do. From and I think Alan will back me on this one. So at the end of Fair Warning, or at the end of Women and Children First, and you're getting into the rehearsals and everything for Fair Warning, I think that everything came off of the Bumblebee, including that DiMarzio with the A5 magnet in it. And I'm gonna go to my grave saying it's an A5 just because of the way it sounds. And I think it's a short A5 because of the way that pickup sounds. And I believe that fair warning was probably recorded with that pickup. And then shortly thereafter, Duncan or whoever rewound one of his PAFs, probably the original PAF, because they didn't have any money, right? So it's not like they had all kinds of stuff to play with, even though records were selling well, they still didn't have any money. I figured you just rewound one of those old PAFs, and if the year is correct, it's got the short A5 in it. If it's a 61 to 63, whatever you believe, that's when Gibson was putting the short A5s in those.
Yeah,
PAFs.
it would have been
T-top.
63 because of the 335 that he pulled it from. That's the earliest year, and that makes sense that it would be like 63.
So that solidifies the short A5 even more.
Yeah.
61 is a little sketchy. You're kind of taking a guess, but once you get to 63, it's definitely a short A5.
Yeah, but
Now, would we not say that would be the T-top?
It's not a T-top, no.
It's a patent sticker.
It's a patent detail.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like it's still a PAF. It's just Gibson basically had become more consistent with their construction of the humbucking pickup at that point. There was a little bit different wire that they used, but they basically had a very consistent spec pretty much from that point onwards, pretty much from 61, except for the magnets, obviously. The magnet.
Okay. My mistake. I meant to say patent number.
Yeah, it was a patent number.
Yeah, the patent sticker. But the cute story, I think it's the patent number on those is actually the bridge for the Birdland. It's the trapeze tailpiece.
Yeah, it's or that or the Les Paul. I think it was the Les Paul tailpiece, something like that. But it doesn't match. It's the wrong number. Yeah.
So Gibson was playing games anyway, even with that patent.
Yeah.
They didn't have the pickup actually patented or whatever the reason.
True.
But so what I think went on then is that Ed said something to the effect of, I'm assuming it was Seymour that said, or that's probably the best guess, and said, I like this pickup, his DiMarzio with this Alnico magnet in it. Make this for for this guitar. Whatever the reason was, if you look closely at the picture, the bobbins on that Super Distortion were doing this because he's got the wrong magnet in there. And he's pulling the screws tight and he's pulling the bobbins apart.
Yeah, that was actually the pickup that he tried to pot himself, actually.
Yeah, I got a few of those laying around myself.
Yeah. So he kept it in the wax for too long and it started to distort.
So that's the theory. So when I finally got my guy Paul up in Canada to create this thing for me, I sent my Super Distortion, my 70s Super Distortion up there with the short A5 in it. And the magnet is special too, which I got the magnets. I got a couple of short A5s from Rewind Electric, really good PAF makers. And I paid an awful lot of money for a Alnico bar magnet. Each one was like $30. And I thought, oh man, I just got taken. Because those guys have a reputation of doing everything right, and they build these period correct PAFs, and the way the magnets are charged and everything. I thought, I probably just got screwed. But anyway, so I sent the pickup up to Paul to analyze the thing, and he measured the Gauss across the magnet, the charge of the magnet, and sure enough, there was something a little bit different about it.
Really?
And that's the secret sauce, and that's the one thing I won't talk about. But I don't want to stamp out Paul's business,
Fair enough.
But he built a jig to actually magnetize the magnet that way, so he can magnetize, and that's why it's called the asymmetric. It's not the coils; it's the magnet.
Yeah,
it's not magnetized evenly.
Wow.
So anyway, again, this is part speculation, part theory, and all this stuff, and quite a bit of evidence that points to this. But so we did a few prototypes, and I got that pickup back, the last one because I was melting them. We had to find good bobbins that wouldn't melt. So every time he sent me a prototype, I'd melt it, and I'd be bending the bobbins back and everything. And I shrunk one of the slug bobbin. It shrunk at least a 1/4 inch smaller than the screw bobbin, the screw coil. But anyway, but they sounded pretty good, but they were microphonic as hell. So he had to change some of the things, some wire tensions, and a couple of things in how the base plate was put together with the screw coil going through. And so the last prototype that I got is the one that I put in the guitar that you hear on the video that I'm playing. And to me, it is absolutely the pickup, because the thing that I fight, I play loud all the time. I play these Marshalls really loud in here, variac down and all that sort of thing. But nobody plays like that anymore. Everybody plays at bedroom volume or attenuators or this and that. And the pickup winders have gotten smart to that. So they wind a pickup with a lot of bottom end in it. So when you start to run at volume, your speaker cabinet does that. It builds up 160 hertz and it becomes super irritating to try to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And so you do that with a JB or an EVH, Frankenstein or a Wolfgang or even a 78. Even the Gibson 57 Classics are wound too hot in the bottom. This pickup doesn't do that. So it's when you're playing stuff like the pedal tone in Panama, and the intro, the E, you're pedaling on the E and you slide down to D. It's not overwhelming. You're not having to try to notch that out of the mix or anything. When you're playing the Hang 'em High intro, it's not overwhelming. You can actually hear the notes coming out of all of it. Just it just fits perfectly when you do that. So, because that's the way the super distortion is. That's the way that 70s super distortion with the short A5 is. And that's what really made the light bulb go off in my head and say, I got to get this done. So I'm convinced. I'm 100% convinced that this is the one.
Yes. So you didn't have to try to lower the bass side of the pickup, try to lower it down, anything like that.
No, I mean, I'm not a big fan of pickups right up against the strings anyway. I think you lose a lot of the woodiness and the actual tone of the instrument when you do that. So I'm not a big fan of doing that, but not excessive either. I mean, it's not like a 1/4 inch.
Yeah, to that point, I had mentioned this to Paul the other day. Basically, what I've found, and you could speak to this, guys, but I've found that just literally doing the Gibson spec, in terms of the pickup height, and same with Strats, if you follow what they recommend, it's like right on the money, pretty much. I mean, there's some fine adjustments. But, you're essentially, if you're following their recommendations, you're pretty much right where you need to be most of the time. And a lot of my vintage buddies, from, that are, real anal about this stuff, they're really hovering right in that recommended manufacturer string height,
No, I agree completely.
Yeah.
So we got people in the chat. We kind of ignored them so far. I just want to, people are going to be asking questions throughout this. And I know we have a couple of questions already. Let's just try to hit those. I'm trying to remember. Somebody had a good question here before.
I see Randy Price, give me wedges or give me death. I'm with you, my friend. I'm with you. And no clicks either. Screw that. That's for
Gary asked about the difference between DiMarzios and Mighty Mites, and I explained that the bobbin holes between the top two and the low bottom strings are how you differentiate that.
You can see that very well or not, but these are Mighty Mites. These are 70s Mighty Mites, like probably really early, and there's no holes.
Yeah.
I always found them to be a little bit more airy, just a hair more airy than the DiMarzio too. I don't know why that is.
I don't know what is with these ones. These are in this guitar. It's the most aggressive guitar I've ever played.
Yeah.
It's just super over the top, almost like hang on and look out, because it's going to take you. But it's and they're ceramic too. I always kind of wondered if Ed, because I'd heard that Ed had an Olympic hot rod kit. I had done the same thing as a kid in the 70s, in like 76 or 77. I have a 65 SG with those pickups, and I put a Olympic hot rod kit. It was just basically a ceramic magnet swap for the Alnico in there. But I wonder if Ed had tried that on, at all, if that may be what we're hearing on the first album or not. Who knows? But it's
I don't think so. I don't hear a ceramic at all on there, but
yeah. But he was really swapping stuff around. He was swapping magnets and doing a lot of experimentation and that type. The easy stuff to do. And he wasn't winding pickups like he said he was doing.
right.
But he was definitely swapping magnets out and doing that sort of stuff.
Right. I think he knew enough about the sound of the super distortion to know that he tried it.
Exactly.
Because the way he kind of poo-pooed the super distortion, that, and I had mentioned this to Tanner before we jumped on, that little quote where he says, well, people think you can put a DiMarzio super distortion and call it rock and roll, man. and that isn't it, that kind of thing. So, but he makes that statement because I'm certain that he tried it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then one little thing I did want to interject about, because we're on the subject of pickups. This is all relative to using the actual gear the way Jim uses it. We're not going through an aux box like 99.9% of people do. We're not even using, as great as it is, we're not using the power station, the PS2. It's just, you got your Variac, and you're really doing it with the real volume. And so like in my case, and I was mentioning this to Tanner too, and I've talked to you guys all about this at some point, but I'm using my real amp for the Van Halen stuff. I use is my Rocksta Marshall made by my friend Mark Abrahamian, and that is a post-phase inverter master volume, which is not at all what Ed did, period. But a stock super distortion or the Mighty Mite equivalent sounds wonderful in my amp, but it is not going to sound so hot in Jim's setup, and it's not going to sound so hot but again, Jim makes the point in his videos, and everybody needs to take a breath and realize this. The whole thing is designed so that you can adjust for the pickups, for the guitar. You can pretty much get these sounds out of a lot of guitars. And I'm gonna shift it to the 1984 thing. I haven't gotten a chance to plug it in yet, but watching Jim's demo video, Jim took a Telecaster, okay, and he managed, in my opinion, through the magic of IK, and he took that, and it sounds really, really close to the Ripley tone, just using a regular old Telecaster bridge pickup, and he massaged that to make that happen. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do in this setup, and Jim makes that point a lot, but I think it still ends up getting lost somehow. It's designed for you to tweak it based on the gear that you have, and you can take virtually anything you got and really make it work. I say that as I still have the super distortions in my guitars. Paul is making me the same pickups that for my guitars, and I'll be able to do that. But just dial it back, just like Jim says.
Listen,
Spaced.
I find that Ed, did prefer more the PAF style wind to the super hot wind of the of the Mighty Mite. What was it, the 1300 or the super distortion? In fact, I know that Frankenstein at one point had a Zebra DiMarzio PAF, not a super distortion, because it doesn't have the hex bolts in it. It has the regular Gibson style setup on it. Knowing Ed, he probably just DiMarzio and called it a super distortion, or the writers may put that in there for him. They said, "Oh, he must be a super distortion because it's whatever."
Most of the DiMarzios that Ed used were actually DiMarzio PAFs, the double cream, because you can see, and he probably had 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
And I, as far as I know, he had one super distortion that he used, which was that Bumblebee pickup that was modified.
Exactly, and that was for the obviously he put that in for the '79 tour.
Yeah, and I agree completely with that. You can just tell, and so much of the studio sound is done with 1176 compressors. You're stacking 1176 compressors, and then you're running it through the chambers. You're getting the reverb sizzle, and then you're compressing the reverb on top of it. So you're getting all of this fullness and goodness happening, and all that sizzle is getting compressed into one big. So yeah, but you still get note separation. That's why I can guarantee it's not a ceramic magnet on one for sure. It's a PAF pickup, and I think
And importantly, like I've talked to Jim and his comment, or I commented on Jim's video about like the isolated tracks and the processing after everything. The amount of things that come after that makes a big effect too. Not just the compressors, but just mastering and all that stuff. Is it squashes everything to be nice and clean. And isolated tracks are not a true representation of that because they're just straight from the isolated into a digital Guitar Hero video game.
Right.
With no, the drums aren't affecting the guitar and nothing's affecting each other, which is what you get. And it's just why when you isolate via AI, you get artifacts and you get squashing in the cymbals, squash the guitar and all this stuff. And when you get these isolations, it's not just because the AI sucks. It's because there's just nothing there. The cymbals have been squashed by the guitar for that millisecond or whatever. And
it's not the equivalent of like a solo track on a multi-track master. So,
and that's just it too. People are, I mean, tape is so long ago now. I mean, the guys that are playing now and the young guys, because we're a bunch of old bastards, but the young guys that are playing, sorry, Donnie. Sorry. The rest of us are old bastards, all right? But anyway, they don't understand, or they don't fully get all right, we're gonna record to the 2-inch. We're doing multi-track. We're doing the 16 or 24 track. And the engineers of the day would print EQ onto those 24 tracks. They were trying to produce the album on the multi-track.
Yeah.
When they then once they did that, they got everything tracked on the raw tracks on the multi-track on the 24 track. Then they have to mix it down to 2 tracks. So there's another EQ stage. There's another pass through the console. There's more tape that's involved.
Yeah.
There's more processing that's put on, because they probably printed 1176 compressors on Eds going into the 24 track.
Yeah. And
then they're using LA2As and 1176 is coming out onto the 2 track. So all of that stuff affects. And if you hear reverb on your ISO track,
that's not real. No.
Yeah.
Because the ISO track went on the 2, or the reverb went on the 2 track.
Yeah.
And the reverb was taking from almost everything that had, unless they had multiple reverbs, obviously. Maybe the drums got their own and Ed's got his own, depending on if they were using EMT and chamber at the same time.
Right.
I found that some of Al's stuff is definitely EMT. But you got the snare, you got the toms, and maybe the cymbals all going into one track, one speaker in the chamber or into the EMT all at once. And if you have the Guitar Hero isolated tracks, you'll know that there's a kick, snare, toms, and a cymbals like track, and each one of them has their own reverb, which is just not representative of. You could set the amount of the send into the reverb. Obviously, you could turn the snare drum down in that send and get less reverb from that. But it was all getting printed to one track, and whatever they had left after the 20 tracks they used on guitar and bass and vocals and drums.
Oh, so that's exactly right. I'm old enough because I remember recording that way. So I did all that. So I get it. I did.
Well, that's what I've pivoted to that because of my Alex Van Halen quest. Like I was using the Guitar Hero tracks a lot in the beginning, which are gated to hell because of the operation of the game. They wanted you to be able to hit the pads of the Guitar Hero game, and you would hear Alex Van Halen's snare. But on the original tracks, there's not a lot of gating, not until probably at least 5150 or like that era, like mid 80s era.
Yeah.
And all the bleed's gone from the drums, and it was really recently the Rock Band 4, I think, just released, and they put 4 or 5 songs from Van Halen, Run with the Devil, Dance the Night Away, Hot for Teacher, and 1 or 2 others. And if you listen to the drums, you listen to everything, you can hear Ed's intro on Ain't Talking About Love. You can hear the sheer amount of bleed. You can hear the snare buzz when Ed's playing and the bass is playing. Like they weren't EQing the cymbals to literally smithereens just so you couldn't hear the bass and guitars, and it's a lot more representative. So I suggest to anyone, if they can get those are much more accurate, despite the fact that it's still a compromise with the reverbs and stuff like that.
There's a couple of suspect punches on the first album that I think one's in Running with the Devil and the other one is, I think it might be Jamie's Crying. But I'm having a feeling like Al had a late snare hit, and you can hear the punch because the cymbal wash.
Yeah.
Because there's no isolation. You can't. So the cymbal wash cuts and then goes again.
I just found an artifact.
You can hear that a lot better now on the new remasters. It's really clear. It's amazing.
Yep.
There's an artifact in the Ain't Talking About Love drum track, which I first heard on the Guitar Hero isolated tracks, and I thought it was just a mess up in their process, but it's on these ones too. And if you listen, like I don't know the timestamp, it's like 10 seconds in, all of a sudden there's this like extra kind of like cymbal track that you can hear like very quickly, and I'll try to find it and post it on Facebook so people can hear it. But it's a complete glitch that made it through. And like there's the other time, I think Alex has gone on record by saying that like one of the tracks, kick drum didn't register, so it's like there's supposed to be 2 kick drum mics on it and one wasn't. And I haven't found which one it is, but definitely issues went on that people don't know about these days.
True.
Hey, Jim, so we got a question here. Mike McGuire, he's in the chat, but he wanted to ask you this. How close Jim's original amp is to the captures in terms of feel and harmonics? The Tonex is really easy and fun to play. Just wondering if his amp is the same or is it more of a Tonex thing?
No, the amp is even more fun to play.
Oh, really?
Because you've got the room, you've got the volume going, but it's super close. That was one of the things that I really worked on. Once I figured out what Tonex wanted to hear and how to make it do that, I'm almost getting to the point where I'll just sit behind the console here, and if I got to record something quick or I want to try something out or work on something, I just punch up Tonex instead of firing up the rig over there. It's like, because if I don't want to blow my head off, I usually run that amp about 68 volts, but that's still
loud.
That's like that. It's perfect to play with a drummer live. With it's a perfect blend on stage at about 68 volts. But that's louder than I want to figure something out at. I don't need to. My ears are getting old enough, so I just fire up Tonex. So yeah, to answer the question, that it's super close to how the amp feels. Very close to it.
That's excellent. So let's talk a little more about Diver Down, and then we'll hit on to 1984. So we all know Diver Down was recorded in about 2 weeks, right? And it was done at Amigo, right?
Sunset and Amigo. So Pretty Woman was recorded and mixed at Sunset. The rest was done at Amigo and mixed at Amigo.
Right. And we've discussed this album before, and there's only a handful of overdubs, I think, on the whole album. I think it was really like a rushed kind of job. I always say that everybody shits on Diver Down, but I always say that to me it's possibly the most real Van Halen album out of them all, because I think that the fact that they had only 2 weeks to do it, and I think their personalities shine through on there. Some of the Roth song choices, Big Bad Bill and stuff. Yeah. I think that's a real good snapshot of Van Halen. I know, Ed would always, crap on things, because obviously there was a power struggle going on there, or whatever.
Right.
But, when that album came out, he was glowingly talking in interviews about it at the time. And you know what? And there's some, even if there is only 3 or 4, original songs on it, they're all brilliant. Those songs.
It's a monster. I think it's a monster album for originals. Come on, Hang 'em High.
Yeah.
And how about the full guitars? Yeah, little guitars, the full bug, Hang 'em High. Those things are cookers. That's like the ultimate Van Halen swing shuffle thing going on.
A lot of live solos, not a lot of overdubs. I think I remember reading somewhere, and I don't know if it was Guitar Player or something way back in the 80s, that the same day that Ed did the guitar solo for Dancing in the Streets, he had done the solo for Secrets on the same day he recorded both of those. So I guess everything the setup wise was exactly the same. They did them both that one day.
And if you listen to them, it sounds the same.
Yeah.
It really is the same guitar tone.
Yeah.
And that's, I think I mentioned on my pre-release video for the IK Multi, the Tonex thing, that Diver Down's kind of a one-trick pony when it comes to the guitar sound. I mean, you really only, I used one for the rockers, you know, the kind of the standard Van Halen things, which is how I always do it. I always end up using just one because I'm an old, you know, live guy. You know, I don't have a pedal board. I don't have channel switching. If I want a clean sound, I just turn the guitar volume down, you know, that kind of thing. I'm one of those players, but
that's how Ed rolled though, too. That was Ed's approach. It was very, you know, he was really quite simple. You know, It wasn't really until after all this that he got into the Bradshaw racks and all the complicated stuff, you know.
Yep. And that's kind of my mantra too. Whenever I start getting way out there, too complicated, I go, nah, it's much simpler than this. It's got to be simpler. So I'm missing the right solution. So that's part of my methodology too, for sure. It's got to be simple.
So I think one of the ones that you zoned in on was that Good Times 73 volt load resistor, warm and tight. That was that was like a Diver Down.
Yeah, to me, that's the one I played. Where have all the good times gone? Whatever I played in the video, Hang 'em High, Full Bug. And I used it for the Pretty Woman clip too. I just put chorus on it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, so it's the same thing. The reason I gave you so many different choices, different album captures in these, is because I want everybody to be able to dial in their rig to how they want it. I want to give them the choice because every pickup's a little different. Everybody's monitors are a little bit different. Maybe they're playing it through their guitar rig. They're coming into the effects return on their guitar amp and they're using the Tonex that way and playing through a 412. I just wanted to give everybody as many options as I possibly could. And there was a weird thing that for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because we're tuned to standard now or there was less gain. The mids were really tricky. So if I would take, let's say I'm changing some EQ on the console here and I'd be, let's say somewhere around 2K, 2.5K, and I cut back 1 dB at 2.5K. It would so wildly alter the entire mid-range sound. Making adjustments was really tricky. So you can almost hear what I'm doing as you go through the presets. You'll hear the different mid contours because and 84 had a little bit of that, but the Diver Down sound was really affected by that. I kind of went back to more of the standard formula on 84, but I think on Diver Down, I think I've got like 18 alternate versions of like one capture.
Wow.
And that's just so you can click through and say what works best and then adjust those knobs a little bit. But you shouldn't have to do it drastically. I can make every guitar in here, super distortions, whatever. I got everything in here. All kinds of guitars in here with different pickups. It usually doesn't take me more than one or two. If everything's set at 5 straight up noon, if I can go to, if a guitar is too dark, if I move the treble to 6, I'm good. And most of the time, if I'm using like the new pickup thing, roll the bass back to about 3.5 or 4, and then you'll get there because it's back to that heavy bass thing that new pickups do. So,
in your little guitar, in the what pickup did you put in there? Is it just like a PAF type of?
Yeah, it's a neck 57 classic. It's like I think it's a 7.6 something K 57 classic, and I pretty much run 250K pots in all of them.
Yeah. A lot of people have said that he had, like, even in the Kramer 5150, a lot of people say it was a 250. It wasn't, pot in that guitar too. I don't know, if it was or not. But I don't know if he preferred them. I'm not sure back then.
I don't know either. I don't know because, I remember back then because I'm, again, old enough going into your music store. Nobody had potentiometers sitting around. Hey, they'd reach into a bucket. Oh, you got a scratchy volume pot? Let me reach into my parts bucket here. And they'd throw you one. Was it a linear taper, audio taper? It doesn't matter. As long as
it's just a pot, you know.
As long as pot. And so, you know, if you're tearing apart Fender Stratocasters and putting humbuckers in them, well, those are 250K pots in the Strat. And think how many extras you get if you're pulling two out, because you only need one. So now you got two extra 250K pots to put in something else.
And Ed was always pulling pots, even though so many of his vintage Strats are missing potentiometers. Like he's got these.
I don't use it. I don't need it. So
yeah,
I'll put in something else. So yeah, so that's, to me, that's all right. One of my tests, if the guitar's got too much output, you know, we talked earlier about every knob on 10. And if you've done that with a 4-holer, if you put volume 1 and volume 2 up with your standard 1959 4-holer, what does it do? It farts out, it gets squishy, it compresses, it crashes, it gets just really crap sounding. So you got to back it off a little bit, back them off to about 9, you know, 8.5, 9, and then it starts to sound pretty good. If you've got the right pickup, if you've got the right input level going into the amp, it's straight across all 10. The right frequency range coming out of the pickup too. So that's, to me, that's part of the magic. And that's how you get the unchanged sweep too. It's all part of the same equation.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Also, so on Diver Down, so you don't hear any harmonizer on there at all, any Eventide, right? You think it's just
I'm using it. I'm sure they had it. I mean, by the time they were recording that, I mean, the Eventide had been out, the 910 had been out since what, 75, 76, something like that.
Did he use the 949 at all anywhere?
Those came later. I don't think they ever recorded with the 949 because they went at 5150. They went from the 910s to the Ultra Harmonizer.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, the 83000 came right after the 910 in the studio, and I don't think he ever did use the 949.
So no, the 949s were only in the live rig, as far as I know.
So you use that on 84, too,
but not in the studio.
Not in the studio. So yeah, the 910s, I've got that on. I just think that's part of the equation, and like the way I set them up, there's no pitch detune. It's just that little modulation. It's just doing what the 910 does.
Well, you blew my mind with that because, you know, I always thought that they had, you know, that Don and Ed would always say, that they, you know, we used as a reverb, we used but really it's not. You're saying there were two 910s and that there was a latency issue, and the latency caused that little slap kind of delay here on top dead legs and things like that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's an old trick. I had an engineer show me that with the hardware stuff many years ago. You'd stack two 910s and you get that really nice little slap.
Yeah, and that's like a signature thing. I hear that. I do hear that on Diver Down, and obviously on 84 you hear that too. That's like that blew my mind when you said that. I was like, wow. I always
it's an ambient recording too, especially for the drums. So very likely there's a lot of guitar in those drums, and especially being as compressed as they were. And I think that's a very good reason why songs like I'll Wait and Drop Dead Legs didn't make the cut for Guitar Hero, because they just couldn't split it up. They couldn't take the guitar from the drums enough and keep the drums sounding the way they would with, you know, now they can do, you know, AI very easily, and most games don't care about that separation bull crap that the Guitar Hero cared about in 2008 or whatever. Well, before we leave that subject, I do want to put my 2 cents in, because, you know, I'm going to do it. But the
when you look at the time, guys, I got to go.
I know, right? So, you know, Johnny had asked about the 910s, and so for Diver Down, and you know, I know that John and I don't hear any Eventide whatsoever on Diver Down. I just hear the Roland chorus warble. And to my understanding, they probably did not have the Eventides at Amigo. Sure. Obviously, we know they had them at Sunset Sound, but I don't think at Amigo they had the Eventides there.
What do you think?
So that's my 2 cents on that.
What do you think is on the
Do what?
beginning of Good Times? Where have all the good times gone? The E to D. What do you think you're hearing there? You think you're hearing?
I think that the only modulation that I hear on that record is the Roland. I could be wrong, but that's what the way I hear it. Yeah.
But I do hear that latency that we're talking about, that little slap. I do hear that on because I remember I was just messing around with my Eventide pedal here and stuff like that. And I made a preset for like 84 for like Drop Dead Legs. And then I just happened to look at the same one I made for Little Guitars, just screwing around. And it was exactly the same thing. And then I'm thinking, well, I'm sure, back in that day, that's pretty much what he was using, the same on both of those, albums. They were like very similar. So
yeah, I will say that for Drop Dead Legs, that double 910 thing that you did sounds amazing. Really good.
Yeah,
that was wow.
I wish I could do the stacked 1176 thing, because that's the problem is Tonex doesn't hear it. So I had to do a workaround for that. You can't do compression you can do some compression with Tonex, but you can't do the full on stack. So there's a workaround that I do for that when I'm doing these captures, but because that's an integral part. That was the thing. They stacked 1176s, they stacked 910s. And I think I mentioned to you, Alan, or maybe it was John, that the Eventide plugin actually comes with a stacked, a dual H910 and a dual 949. So that's just part of their plugin. That's how popular it was to do that. And I find
the stacked 1176s came all the way back to when Don recorded Lowell George for the Little Feat stuff. That was the source of Lowell's slide sound, because when you basically set the 1176s in reverse settings, it basically was like unlimited sustain, and when you run straight into them.
I find it, just to push back a little, Alan, I find it really hard to believe that Amigo Studios didn't have a 910. That they didn't have.
Yeah, they had to have it. That was LA. And those studios were so competitive. Everybody had them.
And if they didn't, they would have brought one from another studio, because they were Van Halen.
Yeah,
and Ed loved them.
Yeah.
I hear the Roland DC30. I hear it on Little Guitars. Obviously, it's on Pretty Woman. Where else do you hear it?
Definitely on Cathedral.
On Cathedral. Okay, I'll give you that one too.
Yeah. No, I think that because I think that Diver Down was so rushed that they didn't. I don't. It would be interesting if I could get, and I had mentioned this, if I could get some kind of confirmation as to what gear they had at Amigo. I don't think that they would have actually even brought that stuff, brought an Eventide for them, because it was so rushed. I don't hear it there. I hear it on Fair Warning. I hear it, I even hear it on the first album, the second album in a couple of spots, the 910s. It's obvious on 84, but for Diver Down, I'm hearing just the Roland, for anything that sounds like modulation to me. And then also Secrets. That's another one. Secrets was another one, which has definitely got the Roland on it for the chorus.
It's not necessarily the modulation, it's the expansion of the sound is what it does.
Right.
That's a 910 just does. When I say a 910 does what a 910 does, that's what I mean. I've always wanted one in the live rack whenever we played anywhere in the front of house rack, because of what it did to the sound. It's almost like this huge expansion, this spread of, it's just, I mean, that's what they do. To me, they're instantly recognizable. As soon as I hear one, I go, oh, there's a 910. There's a 910 in the mix. And that's what I hear on Where Have All the Good Times Gone. I hear it in Hang 'em High. I hear it in the Full Bug. It's in there. I would give you 99.9% that it's in there.
Okay. I'll jump in and add, because I'm always talking about this guitar with Donnie and Chris and everybody. Jack says, what guitar was used for the solo of I'll Wait? And I think it's pretty well at this point. I feel very confident in saying it was the B4129 Kramer Pacer Deluxe. and Jim had mentioned that in his video. You've definitely got the different pickup selections going on. There's definitely a single coiled neck pickup happening in the all weight solo. And he is going back and forth. And even in some of those later live versions, when Ed's got the Red Wolfgang, I think there's a couple of them where he's trying to mimic the record a little closer, and you can see him flipping the pickup positions during that solo. So that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
And I agree with you. No pushback on that one. Not whatsoever.
Yeah, Alan, you've won all those arguments. I always thought that the Kramer 5150 made an appearance on 1984, but I'm pretty convinced now it's all Frankenstein. Maybe in a few, maybe it's on there somewhere. I don't know, but I think it's definitely the Frankenstein. But let's move to 1984 a bit. I mean, there's some questions and things in also that. Let's take a look through there and see what they have. Stan here is eventide on Where Have All the Good Times Gone. I know Caleb said, I believe Good Times was sped up on the tape, like a Verispeed or something. It's a rare quarter step down. The YouTube demos of that song are E flat. So I don't know if what you guys think about that.
There's some differences I'll say about the pitch there in the raw tracks that have been out there, some of which are from Diver Down. For some reason, and I don't know if it was the bootlegging process when it got put on a DAT or whatever, whoever booted that stuff and got it out. Virtually all of those actual raw tracks are maybe like 10 or 15, roughly a quarter of a step down from the album versions.
And that could just be a difference in 2-track speed. It could be all kinds of things. When
could have been how they calibrated or didn't calibrate the machines correctly. I mean, yeah.
Or what if
they are all? That's a strange thing though, because all of those raw tracks are lower than the album versions.
So what if they tracked Where Have All the Good Times Gone at Sunset and then mixed it at Amigo? Because what if they were going to do a flip side to Pretty Woman? Think about it. But they didn't finish it, and they finished it. It could be all kinds of things. So you could be taking the 2-inch tape over to Amigo. Amigo's running at a different speed. I mean, there's tape speed, there's tuning differences, as you know, all over this stuff. Did they intentionally adjust tape speed? I doubt it. But were the machines calibrated? Probably not. I mean, it was.
Alan, you and I have talked about that all the time with the Police. Every little thing she does is magic. They recorded the demo, singed it in Quebec, and then they went to Montserrat, and it's actually higher. It's above standard tuning. I think, and that's probably because the calibration. I would think of the machines, right?
Oh yeah, that stuff happens so many places. In fact, what was funny, I just yesterday I went back to my Clapton roots, and I was working on something else, and I was like, oh, I want to play Outside Woman Blues, and I went back and listened to the record, and I'm like, the rhythm track of Outside Woman Blues, the drums, bass, and guitar, they're about 7 cents below the guitar solo, which is in dead on standard pitch. So it's everywhere. It happened all over the place,
So 1984. So the load resistor, you think was all over? Maybe not Panama because that's a little hairier, I guess.
I used it.
You did.
I used the same. Again, I used that same patch. Whatever I set on that one was the same preset, same tone model. So it's the load resistor you're hearing on Panama too.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, I imagine that it was hanging off the amp on that tour too, because when you hear.
Well, I think, yeah, I have a feeling he was doing that a lot live. But I think the studio was one of those things that, who was it? Lindsey Wagner that was bitching about volume at 5150. I mean, those are all considerations. You got to think about all that. Is that really why, Tanner, what did Al have for the drum kit? it was
Uh,
Simmons kick and
Simmons kick, rototoms.
It's
You know,
floor tone, right?
he had a couple of Simmons toms and stuff like that. And
so the only thing that was really, I mean, the rototoms, they don't have any kind of wumma, you know, they don't, it's not like a real drum. And then you've got, so the only thing he had was the snare drum cracking, right?
So
pretty much, yeah. Cymbal and
we have one floor tom.
Feisties are incredibly cutting in a
I know, I
room.
got a bunch over here, right at the drum.
They had obviously the gobo, like the gobos from the beginning, I think, to isolate a little bit. And I think they set Al in the back corner and Ed in the front corner for a reason.
But so why I asked that is, and you've got Lindsey Wagner, and he's, you know, they build the studio, and what do they have it a permit as a racquetball court?
Yeah.
You know, so they're trying to subvert the law and you know, local ordinances and all that stuff. So they're trying to keep it quiet. You know, you can think of all different ways to do that. And if he was using a load resistor live, if he had been, say, well, let me do this, you know. And the other one that always, you know, that always kind of sticks in my craw, although it comes a little bit later, is like the Letterman. Letterman appearances. How is he in the Ed Sullivan Theater playing his half stack?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, not Ed Sullivan Theater at that time.
That was NBC. That was 30 Rock.
That was 30 Rock, yeah.
Even smaller, 30 Rock, right?
Yeah.
So it's an even smaller studio.
Yeah.
He would have, I mean, even at 60, even like I play mine at 68 volts, that would have been way too loud. So what did he do? Did he put a load resistor on it and he turned the variac down to 60, 65, 63 volts? I mean, he said he'd run it down to 60, but they get a little spanky at 60, and that tone doesn't sound spanky to me.
Alan and I have talked about this, and I think he can add to it that the cabinet, I found a picture, actually a nice zoom in picture of the Letterman show, and you can see there's registration marks on the wood grain of the cabinet to show that it's the same cabinet from the Women and Children First kind of photos in the studio, as well as multiple other ones. And in the Metropolitan Museum, it's the top right slant cabinet, visually way dirtier and more dented than the rest for a good reason. And what I'm getting to is that Alan actually kind of introduces to me that some cabinets are just quieter, and there's no explanation to it, like molecularly and you know, the way the bracket stems off of from the front panel to the back panel and all that stuff, and how it resonates and how the speakers resonate in the cabinet, and obviously the materials. If you guys have ever watched Johan Seshborn's channel on YouTube, he's tried everything from the different types of materials to the back of the cabinets, and it all surprisingly makes a difference. And he doesn't usually do a volume kind of rating to tell, but some cabinets are just quieter, and he clearly preferred that slant cabinet because it likely was probably a little bit quieter than the rest of his cabinets.
Yeah, and so we had talked about that. I think I mentioned this to every one of you guys at some point about that quieter cabinet thing, and that I got that from
JD, right?
From JD. So JD Simo, you know, he said, hey, right now everybody's getting rid of their 4x12s. This is a golden moment to go and just, you know, go on Reverb, go to somebody's house on Facebook Marketplace, try like 11, 12, 15 4x12 cabinets, and you know, there's going to be some differences, and you'll probably run across one of these kind of magic quieter ones. And you know, and I can attest from just standing with him and playing through when he was using 100-watt Marshalls without pulling tubes. I mean, I could have a conversation with him over the kind of roaring chords. I mean, you know, it's strange, and he was playing. You know, at that time he was playing in a relatively small club. It was not overwhelming, and it was like perfect balance, stage balance with the you know, with the bass player, and you know, it just all worked. So, and that's an interesting observation though about Letterman, you know, which is one of my favorite tones, and Johnny knows, everybody knows the Letterman one is really the one that I chase. But yeah, you're right. That was a small place. He's he's not trying to overwhelm Paul Schaefer's little, coterie of wacky keyboards. And now, mind you, you can't hear Sid McGuinness whatsoever.
Might be by design. Could be.
Maybe. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah, when you watch the Letterman things, it's like, where's Sid? You can barely hear him at all. Such a trip. But anywho, and one other thing, as I'm about to have to take a break for a second to give my son a bath after soccer here, but it's another little point for 84, and I was talking about this with John. So there's definitely, they had the EMT 140 ST, I think they said was what was in 5150. So there's definitely, not a the reverb chamber happening on 84. So they've got the EMT happening on that record.
I thought the EMT came later.
For 84, it was there.
Yeah, it was there for 84. Yeah.
It was there for 85.
It wasn't used very much, though. It's very sparing, really. You barely hear that.
When they did the write-up. 85 is when they did the write-up of the studio and added the green EMT that they built into the ceiling or something like that.
Yeah, that was another thing. I was talking to John about that. I think so green EMT is actually not EMT plate reverb. That is a designation for conduit for electrical wiring. So that's the stuff that's in the ceiling that they mentioned. Green EMT. It's like a hospital spec thing, just like the orange the plugs that they describe. So when they say green EMT, it's like a big green cover through which the electrical stuff comes through. And then there's specifically say in that article that it's EMT 140 ST is the name of the plate reverb that was there. And the way I think plate reverb works is that it sits like a file in a file cabinet like this, right, and it can't be turned like this to be in the ceiling. So what they're describing in the ceiling as being green EMT is actually just the electrical conduit going there.
I wonder where they put it, though, in there, because the control room is so small. I don't know where they would have put that.
For sure.
Right.
Because I think it's like 5 or 6 feet long, and it's, like that almost a foot wide, I guess, right?
Right. And we had said maybe they put it in the wall, I mean, I don't know. And back then it was tinier because they hadn't blown it out to get the full drum room,
I think Don was a fan of
I honestly don't hear an EMT unless they EQ'd the crap out of it, which is possible.
I think they did. I think they did EQ the crap out of it. And I think one spot I'll say real quick, one spot where I think you might hear the EMT more clearly than others is on Girl Gone Bad. Listen closely to that. I'm hearing EMT. There's a real sizzly EMT happening there to me.
Well, yeah, sizzle wouldn't be how I would describe EMT. So that's why I say it's got to be EQ'd significantly to get sizzle out of an EMT. But
yeah, that's what I'm hearing. And as we talked about, like even on the Top Jimmy solo, I still haven't figured out what guitar that is unless it's that Kramer Pacer Deluxe. But I think they could have even just taken the Frankenstein and just went wacky with the EQ and made it sound like what it sounds like. That's a really oddball sounding thing that I still can't put my finger on.
Or he played it through the humbucker through the Frankenstein through the combo amps. Whatever.
Yeah, the Music Man's possibly, yeah.
Harley Thompson, maybe.
No. Always keep it simple.
No, not the Hartley Thompson. No,
not the Hartley Thompson. No. Don't even mention.
Don't say that.
No.
Don't get that started, please.
Give it a rest. In Japan, it's like, no. I kill you.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna take a quick break and rest my lips and go give my son a bath. I'll be right back.
All right, I want to hit the chat for a couple more questions.
I want to say one quick thing about the EMT. When I asked Ed about 1984, when we did our long, in-depth interview about it, the only time he did mention reverb was Panama. So I think that might be the only, as far as I know. And I've kind of listened to it. I'm waiting for the Mobile Fidelity to really, do the deep dive on it. But I think that's the only place I hear the EMT myself. So
yeah, I'm going with because I had read too about the RMX 16, the AMS.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I hear on Panama. I hear that big hall, that big room reverb, but it's EQ'd a little bit and it's pulled back in the mix.
I don't know where they would have had the RMX in the rack, because there's not full pictures of the rack.
Oh, I
but there's
know.
no RMX on those photos until Andy Johns came around, and he was a huge RMX guy, and that was like the source of the the drum part of the drum sound. From my findings, he talked about it in like 93 that he would put RMX on the kick and the snare and stuff like that. But the Quantum is Quantum is the plugin. Quantec is the real.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue at all with you on it, because we don't know diddly about what we're doing.
I mean, the only person who probably knows is Don, and he ain't saying.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if he remembers, to be honest. So
at this point, right?
Yeah.
When Greg asked him about, even just the second album, because Greg Renoff said, it sounds like there's a lot of room sound on that, and Don knew enough to say, not really, no, it's all chamber. And he goes, chamber or plate, or maybe the spring sometimes too. It's like, that's pretty vague. I don't think you remember.
Well, mixed at Westlake, so there's no chamber. It's all all EMT.
Yeah.
Or spring.
It's like anything. I mean, you were working so hot and heavy. A lot of times you just weren't taking notes on things. It's just, sounds good. Let's move on.
That's right. I mean, we sit here and overanalyze everything.
Yeah.
And that's why I say use your ears, because like I said, Chris, if it is an EMT, they must have EQ'd it, because it's got that sizzle. So, but that's what they did, because they were creative. They were looking for different sounds. They wanted it to fit in the mix in a certain spot. So that's always my mantra too. Just use your ears, use your best judgment, and figure it out, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Well, and it's kind of unreliable about that. That's those specific recording details too. So I know that's the one time he mentioned the EMT to me ever, except that he hated it.
Right.
On the first album, which really was the echo chamber too. It wasn't the EMT. So there you go.
That's probably the answer right there. Him and Al hated it, and they told Don, "Listen, we don't want an EMT on it. We know you put it in here when you spec'd out the studio, but we don't want it."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
So Don EQ'd it to make it sound like something else. He goes, "How do you like the reverb now?" Yeah, I like it. It's good. I like it.
So just looking to see if there's any other questions. Anybody got any questions? We got just a few more minutes. I don't want to run too late on this. I know, listen, Jim, everybody's going to ask you at some point. I know you just finished this one, but would you ever consider going back and revisiting the next few records?
We're talking about it. I mean, I probably don't want to go beyond the Marshall records, going to the Soldano and then whatever else. I mean, that sound is pretty easy to get.
Yeah.
Right? You can go buy that sound anywhere, the 5150 thing and all that.
Yeah.
Scoop the mids, do what you got to do, do the pitch detune, and you're there. You're in. There's nothing too complex to get that sound. But 5150 and OU812 have some interesting things going on with them. So we're talking about it. We'll see how well this one does. I mean, it's a lot of work, and if it comes down to economics for sure. It comes down to my time too.
Sure.
And can you get it out of the 84 collection?
Yeah,
probably. And I mean, maybe not the specifics, and maybe I'm not guiding you through the woods to get you there, but I mean, I think there are ways that you could come close. I don't think you're going to nail it completely, because I hear some different things in there, but it's just, these albums to me, the first 6 were really unique and what everybody loves. I mean, like Fair Warning, everybody wants Fair Warning. That's such a signature sound. And then 84, John, I know you love that tone, and and to me, that's the closest he ever came to standard plexi. I mean, that's just what a super lead kind of sounds like. Although it's different. I mean, it's not quite that for sure, but you can dial. I mean, you could adjust some of the EQs on that, and you could get into AC/DC territory pretty quickly.
Right.
There's one thing you mentioned about the Telefunken tubes, and that's interesting, because I know that Ed had told me that when he put, he really liked a set of Telefunkens that he put in there. He was basically pretty much diehard. And the thing was with the Sylvania 6EA7s, I lived in Southern California. That's what you got.
Yep.
When you wanted EL34 tubes, you went to your television shop or your drugstores when they still had tubes, and you got Sylvania 6CA7s. That's what you found. And he worked with them obviously really well. But the Telefunken thing I found really interesting, though. You have found that you think it was Telefunkens that he used in the amp at some point. Yeah,
for sure. And even today, the difference between a repro or a vintage 6CA7 and a good EL34 is you can hear it. I mean, you can hear which direction he might have gone. If you take all of the re-EQing and this and that out of it, if you just listen to the amplifier and how the mics are hearing the amplifier, you go, oh yeah, definitely. I can hear some EL34 in there. The rounded top end. I mean, it's speculation, it's theory, but it's use your ears. And how does the amp perform? How does it feel in your hands? How are the harmonics responding with your fingers? And that's what I've tried to do with this collection is do it as reasonable and as accurate without going out on weird things and weird tangents, and just make the amp sound really good in the room, record it, and then try to record it and get it working for Tonex. That's exactly how I built these collections. So I would sit in here in the room, play it, mic up the guitar amp, and then run it through the console, do all my stuff to it. And if I got it sounding just like the record, I would say, okay, I'm here. I've got it. Feels right. The harmonics are right. It plays right. Everything is good in the hands. Sounds right. Now let's figure out how to make the capture work with that. That's how the whole process works. So it's when the previous guy asked about what does the real amp sound like in the room, that's how does it play? So that's, to me, that's how I got to this, is try to make it simple, feel right, play right. And that's why I think this collection feels like a real amp when you play it.
Yeah. I think another key thing that you mentioned too was just going direct into the amp and bypassing the phase shift or the MXR pedals. That again has an effect.
It does.
On the sound.
It does. Absolutely. And there's a lot of that happens on 1984.
Yeah. And it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting departure from I think there's no MXR on Diver Down or 1984. Period. Well, except for that you caught that delay, that rack delay.
Right. Right. Yeah, but that's post more than likely.
Yeah.
So, and where they applied that in the mix at some point, they weren't running a dummy load setup, so you couldn't put it post. You couldn't put it after the amplifier. So it's done in post production. So yeah, that's another part of it and that's my feeling too about the Echoplex. Was the Echoplex used? Probably, but where was it used?
Yeah.
And was it used because the Echoplex adds like that. It's not a big gain thing. And a lot of people think that it adds gain, but it doesn't. It adds a low mid bump in that probably 200 to 600 hertz world. It's just, and it gives you that. It's kind of like the Fat Cat mod, is what it sounds.
Yeah, it fattens the sound up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it comes from like all those pedals that were supposedly Echoplex preamps that allow you to get 10 dB of freaking gain. It's like, that's not what it did.
That's not it. Yeah.
That's not what it did. And so about the Echoplex, I don't doubt that they used it, but did they put it on an auxiliary in post, or did he?
No, my understanding is that with the Echoplex, it was still obviously just straight in front of the amp. And when I listen for Echoplex, I'm not really listening for like the tone thing shaping. I'm just listening for that ducking effect, because I, having just finished Mean Street, doing my transcription of Mean Street, and I know a couple of things. So 1 foot out the door, and Mean Street, I know for a fact that there's Echoplex on that, because that ducking echo is definitely in those two songs. I haven't transcribed the rest of the album, but I hear that there. That ducking thing is on Beat It.
Yeah.
And we know that he brought the Echoplex with him to Westlake for that.
Yeah. And he brought his guitar in the Echoplex, and then he rented the amp. So that tells you how much it meant to him.
Yeah.
Right. And Chris and I have talked about this a million times, and he said it in the 88 kind of interviews where he was having Dan Martin, even in like 88, 89, still tracking down old Echoplexes at that point. So as far as I can tell, Echoplex is on everything through 1984. I don't know. I don't necessarily know for 5150 or OU 812 just yet, but I really hear it on it's certainly on those tracks on Fair Warning, and
And let me clarify, I don't doubt that it's there. What I'm wondering is if, at this point he had Bradshaw switchers, he had all kinds of stuff that he used for live, because I don't hear the Echoplex coloring of the sound on 84. So is it in there?
Well, the thing is, though, the ducking can't be done with any other kind of delay, really.
That's not what I'm saying, though. Yeah, the Echoplex is still in there, but it's only in the circuit when you click it in. But when you're playing it without using the echo of the Echoplex, when you're not engaging the tape heads,
right,
it still colors the sound. And that's what I'm saying is I don't hear that sound coloration. So was he using a part of his Bradshaw switcher to engage the Echoplex? I don't know. That's a good point. I don't doubt that it's there, because I hear the ducking too, for sure.
Yeah.
So it's just I just don't hear the tone that it imparts on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be I could absolutely be right. And even on Mean Street, like I'm not hearing the ducking until the actual overdubbed lead guitar.
Yeah.
So in my transcription, I have I have it. The Echoplex is on only on the actual lead playing.
Right.
And by 81 was when he got the Bradshaw switching system live.
Yeah. And again, as I always say, speculation and theory, and I'm just using my ears, but that's one of the things that I struggled with, was to get that mid-forward sound that you get on 1984. The Echoplex loads down the bottom end a little bit.
Yes.
And it's hard to dial that out, because it's just so, and especially if you got the fat cap going. So was the fat cap installed back then? I know Rudy said it was there in the amp from the beginning, but does Rudy really know?
Yeah.
No, he does not.
Was the fat cap in the 100K NFB added when he was trying to get more gain out of the Marshall? Because the guys that saw that didn't see that till the 90s. But so was it in the amp back in the 80s? I don't know. So those are all the things.
They all say it's stock, but they all are harboring like a single fact about it that they were told not to tell anyone. That's what Dave Friedman said, was like, I can tell you about the fat cap, I can tell you about this stuff, but there's one thing that I was told not to say. And I think John Sir was informed the same thing. I think, and maybe
I think at that point they were referring to the fat cap, because they were talking about a certain mod on V2. So they were talking about, I think they were talking about the fat cap, but
gotcha.
Like the 100K on the 4 ohm tap, the NFB, the negative feedback. That's not, it should be a 47K on the 8 ohm tap. A super bass is 100K on the 4 ohm tap.
Pub day.
Is that
what Marshall Factory is? Pub day.
I know. Or what are we building here? And the 50K mid pot is also super bass.
Yeah.
So that amp was either they ran out of parts on the super lead line and they started digging into the super bass parts, or somebody added those, or the 50K was always there because that was just whatever they had in the parts bin. And
also Jose was really the only guy that looked at his amps after the first album.
Yeah.
So, the stuff that Jose said in his one interview which you guys can find on VH Links that I transcribed. Yeah, he talks about a couple of things in there that I know Jim has got, and thank you for this. This is a tiny thing, but I think it does make a difference, and I'm glad you gave us this choice. The 20 versus the 25 watt greenbacks. And in the Jose interview, Jose says that he and Edward preferred the pre-roll 20 watt greenbacks, but probably used 25 and different things. But, if he had his way, it would be those speakers.
Yeah.
No,
I think they're my favorites. The 20 watt greenbacks are my favorites. And that's the other thing I would say too, nobody plays loud anymore. So when you buy a 412 box and you could buy a 30-year-old 412 box that's always been played with a master volume. Those speakers aren't broken in. Mm-hmm. Break them in. Get a Variac, learn how to do it with a Variac and do them, because it makes a massive difference in how your speakers sound. It's huge. I started doing that. I got a load of 20 watters, and I got those G1265s that are old. They're from I think the date codes on those 65s is 83 that I've got. They weren't broken in. They came out of a Fawn full stack, master volume 2203 Fawn colored full stack and it sat in the guy's house, and the master volume never went above 1. So the speakers weren't broken in. I got them loaded into one of my cabinets. I turned it on, I said, God, these sound like shit. They were horrible. I thought, what did I just do? And then I started thinking about it. I said, no, they're not broken in. So I broke them in with a Variac. I put them on a Variac for 24 hours, 2 nights in a row, 2 days in a row. Just let it run constantly. There's certain voltages. You can look it up. There's a whole chart online to do it. So you're just running 60 cycle hum through it at a certain voltage for hours upon hours upon hours. And when I finally got done doing that and got it broken in, it just dropped right into what I needed to hear. It was perfect.
Wow, that's fascinating, because I've tried G12s and they were just real stiff and they just didn't work, but I didn't do that. I didn't do your method there.
Yeah, so I did that with the 20 watters. I went through the whole, the ones that I had some newer reissue 25 watt greenbacks. I thought, this cabinet's never sounded that good. And I never used it that much, so I said, I'm going to break this thing in. I'm going to do it. So I did all my cabinets, and I beat the hell out of them for like 2 weeks. And then when I mic'd them all up again, they got sweet and they sounded really good.
Wow.
So I highly recommend doing that.
Cool.
So I guess we'll wind it up, guys. It's almost 10 o'clock, hour and a half. I think I'm just looking see if there's any more questions. If anyway, we're kind of here celebrating the release of the 8284 IK Brown Sound series. This is the final chapter, maybe for now.
And I still got to do the amp only captures for the first collection. We're still going to do that. So I got to do that, get that done. Because that's where I've got valves 4 and 5 pulled. For Van Halen 1. So
we got that to look forward to. Yeah. But everybody go. Obviously, this is a labor of love on Jim's part here, and we're all the beneficiaries of it, especially in a time where there's no Van Halen anymore, or any not much to talk about. This is a gift for all of us. You know what I mean?
We can talk about Ed's tone till the day we all die.
I haven't heard a word out of Don. Donnie, what's up?
Donnie, what's going on?
I thought we were going to talk about guitar history, so I had all this stuff out. But you guys just enthralled me with your.
I want to bring this up actually before we go, because you guys should be in agreement, and I am leaning this way too, that the Frankenstein and not the 5150 was at least. I mean, there was an awful lot of flying V on this record too, of course, but that the 5150 was not. I mean, it kind of goes against a little bit of Ed's practices, that because once he takes a liking to something, that kind of becomes his focus.
That's what I
But he did. I know he told Steve Rosen early on, when his memory was probably a little bit better, even though it was a little bit foggy or snowy. But But he said,
Why snowy, Chris? What's
snowy
the
with
reference
dense
there?
clouds, you
In
know.
Southern California, snow? I don't know.
They not that far up in the mountains. I mean, you know, San Gabriel's right above Pasadena. There's a lot of snow.
Krell.
I never saw snow on Mulholland, though.
But anyways, but I you know, I just do find what makes you lean towards it being the Frankenstein. Was there anything in really the deep listening that makes you say definitively that it was that and not the 5150?
To me, it's the pickup.
Yeah,
It's you can look at the snap of it too, because all right, so we're getting into Donnie's territory here. So the Frankenstein had a slab fingerboard on it, and the 5150 is just a one-piece maple neck. So it's softer sounding, and Panama's pretty spanky. So that lends itself to the slab fingerboard. But
And Chris mentioned that Steve Rosen interview. I know I've mentioned this to you guys already, but they're in the unedited version of that interview. He says to Steve, like point blank, "Oh, Panama was the Frankenstein, period."
Yeah.
And that was also where he said, "No, I'm not. I didn't use them on the record, but I'll use them when I go on tour." And that was before the January '84 when the tour started. So you know, there's an interview reference there, but you know, Jim's using his ears, and you know, he's got a great point. And mind you, his collection, you can kind of make anything sound like anything. It's so flexible. But witness his video from yesterday or the other day. His House of Pain. House of Pain was the only song on that record that I thought, oh, maybe that could have been the 5150.
That's the one.
Jim nailed that, man.
That's the one we all thought kind of could be the 5150.
That's what I was thinking too. I was talking to Alan about it. I even said to Alan, that thing it could be the V. I was thinking it could almost be the V because it's got that thing. But when that's another thing. So when I got everything put together, and I'm using the same preset for Hot for Teacher, for Girl Gone Bad, for the V songs, Panama, and Girl Gone Bad or House of Pain, it's all the same amp setup. It's just the guitar making it sound. So that's when it solidified in my head. It's the Frankenstein. That's the other part too, because you know he wasn't in there tweaking everything. It's just
right. He just go in and go.
It's just grab the guitar. I like the way this guitar sounds through the rig right now. Let's roll. Let's go.
Yeah. So Donnie, Jerry says, you know, Frankie had the beak neck on and bridge in the wrong spot in '83. So when they were recording 1984, he did have that beak neck on it.
Yeah, it would have been the beak, because the last time he's got that Dan Electro neck, which was kind of transitional, was right before
I'm going to the booze now because I.
So that the Brian May thing was that he had that Dan Electro thing on
Electro neck,
right.
Yeah. So that was a slab board, but it was pretty thin. Those Dan Electro necks have pretty thin slabs, and I don't know if anything got recorded. Well, I mean that was recorded, of course, but I don't know if anything in the main catalog would have been recorded with that neck, because we obviously at Us Fest, he's got the one-piece bird's eye maple beak neck on there. But you know, Jerry, I think what's more important about Jerry's comment, and this gets overlooked a lot, is when the Frankenstein got a Floyd Rose, it was Ed drilled those holes with a hand drill, all crooked in the wrong spot. So that guitar had the bridge in the complete, like by 3/4 of an inch or something, like a massive amount too far away. So the scale length ends up being longer than 25.5. He's got the saddles all the way forward to try to make up for it, but there's no way it made it all the way, and there's no way it intonated. So the scale of each string is going to be slightly off. He's going to be fighting the guitar in tune, which we know he did from his mannerisms. He would pull into tune even if it wasn't intonated quite right. So there's a lot at play, and I agree. I've always agreed that Frankenstein made more sense for 1984, even though he may have had the 5150 available. All the photos from around that time in the studio, and like Alan said, the interviews he gave around the time all point to the Frank for me. And it makes sense too, because you know you get to the tour, and then you got the next chapter, and the 5150 is his mainstay from then on. So
yeah, you know, and then Donnie mentioned the wackadoo intonation at that point, and Jerry mentioned it, And although House of Pain is pretty right on, like that tuning is not a crazy one, but Panama is like oh my God, what did he do? That was a never repeated alternate universe tuning on Panama. It's so weird. It's one of the outliers in the catalog where I've never found him come anywhere close to repeating that tuning offset anywhere else. And I do think that that's probably a result at that point of that crazy situation that Donnie was talking about.
And maybe some of the harmonics that are a key to that song, you know, the natural harmonic thing probably had something to do with that too. And both the tuning offsets and where he sets the saddles, and also introducing the bridge position. But what's, just to touch on that, go back a little further in time, it's interesting that Fair Warning, Diver Down, and 1984, presuming it is the Frank, all would have had that issue with the Floyd position. And some songs we can't even tell because Ed just fought that thing into tune. It was natural to him.
Well, that was Ed. Ed and Jeff Beck both shared that kind of, that just by ear, they could pick up a guitar out of tune and make it sound perfectly in tune.
There's that Tom Anderson, that guy Benny with Tom Anderson, who was involved in the Frank being, you know, worked on. He told the story about exactly what you say. Exactly, Jeff Beck and Ed were the two examples he cited as being able to. They would intentionally set guitars out of tune and hand them to guys just to see.
Two guys who never had an intonated guitar, properly intonated, right? Their whole careers, pretty much, right?
Exactly.
Well, just so you guys know, I haven't intonated any one of mine for, I don't know, 4 years now. I'm not lying to you.
Intonations for sissies.
So I do that. I do that all the time.
We appreciate the authenticity.
Exactly. Yeah, you're just trying to be historically accurate.
Lazy, John. I'm just lazy. I haven't.
Well, and then obviously on the Frankenstein, you know, it started with the non-fine tuner first Floyd, you know, that was on the B. Like Jim said, everything that was on the B got swapped over to the Frankenstein. And then we had the different iterations of the fine tuner Floyds started coming in, you know, so all stuff's getting just jacked in and out of that thing. So even though, you know, at that one point where Ed's like hand drilling in there, you know, that could have been for what he did for the non-fine tuner. And then what about all the other ones? How did he slap that in there? And, you know, I mean, who knows what kind of schmutz he had to put in there. And then the quarter, and then the no quarter. I mean,
he was definitely shimming necks and taking shims out, depending on which neck was in and which bridge was on, because the base plates were different thicknesses, the saddles were different heights, the necks were different thicknesses. They all needed different setups. So if you watch the quarter go on and off and on again, you can kind of get a feel for like how that applies to which neck. And for what I do, it's kind of an intriguing exercise to kind of guess, well, you know, if this what are the specs of this bridge versus this neck based on if the quarter's there or not? Did he have to shim it this way? And it's like you play these games to try to think of scenarios for based on other points of evidence, and then we end up with stuff like this with all different specs going on. So
right, and going back to the Rude Dan Electro modified neck being used on Starfleet project, you know, Tanner and I and Chris, and I talked to all of you guys for help back when Chris was doing his still excellent and unequaled making of 1984 article. You know, that was such a long gestation for that one to actually come out and print. It's excellent. July 2024, Guitar World, please get it. It's great. But that Tanner and I and we kind of and you guys, that period around the US Festival, the first couple of things that they'd recorded, which we think are like, you know, in the Midnight Hour, Jump, probably some screwing around on the 1984 keyboard solo track, and then Drop Dead Legs. So this Flying V, you know, it wasn't Frankenstein tracks being recorded back then. So that's why I'm thinking like, yeah, all in addition to everything Donnie said, also it just wasn't being used around that time for the things that got recorded then. Later on, you know, when Panama and the overdubs with Floyd, like for the Drop Dead Legs lead guitar track, you know, that's Floyd. So that would have gotten overdubbed later. And by that point, it definitely had the beak neck, because that was well after the US Festival.
Right.
or did it? I mean, that's the thing we don't know. There's kind of he's out of the public eye, and Ed was a tweaker. I mean, and he experimented on his guitars, but he was constantly changing stuff, and maybe he's like, let me try putting that old neck back on. I mean, who knows? We don't know for sure.
That's certainly true. Although we can say like, hey, the Kramer, the beak neck is on at the US Festival, and then the first photos, the Glenn LaFerman photos that we see, no, it's not Glenn, it's Neil. Those studio photos from that time, that where that very picture was taken. What neck do we see? Every photo during that, it's always the Kramer beak neck. But you're right. Anything's possible.
And also, he was very public at that point, and he had a new relationship with Kramer going on. So maybe he wanted to pimp Kramer, And how often have we seen guitar players? It's like, well, and they appear in these photos with this stuff, but what they really use is like, it's like Steve Vai using the Carruthers necks on all his Ibanez's,
yeah,
and stuff. It's like there's little secrets sometimes, and it's, especially when Ed's getting into, having an official endorsement now, he kind of wants to be faithful to the Kramer brand. So
True.
It could be very well that, in the studio, he took that neck off and then he popped it back on to promote the brand. So who knows?
True. And then on the other thing, going back to the Kramer Pacer Deluxe, which had this similar beak neck, not the same, but a similar beak neck. Donnie, this is totally inside baseball and has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But Donnie, let me ask you while I got you here, for a stock like a stock beak neck like we see on the Kramer Pacer Deluxe, what are the differences, if any, between that, what we presume to being a stock neck, versus the beak neck that we see on the Frankenstein?
The bird's eye. So the bird's eye one, I think, is just a complete one-off. And my working theory is that when they were approaching UsFest, I don't know if it was specifically for UsFest or just in general, but as they're approaching UsFest and this endorsement is in full swing, he's got to have, he's getting things like the ad guitar, and he's getting things like the Vetus and these one-offs leading up to this time frame. But I think Ed was still faithful to the Frankenstein, and he wanted to put a permanent installation on the Frankenstein, or what would have been permanent at that time, given how often he swapped these things around. So I think they made him a neck in the vein of what he was using, which at the time would have been the boogie stuff: bird's eye maple, wide nut, so 1 3/4 with an R2 nut shelf. And probably a slimmer profile. I mean, I know some guys in here have even played that neck because it was owned by Cody back in the day. But I think they were more or less some Kramer factory, whether it was ESP, probably not, or one of the other local factories that they could go to and say, I need a neck with these specific specs, that probably made that neck completely one-off to the specs of what Ed gave them or what they measured from what was on the Frankenstein. So headstock even is a little bit different. And my guess is that, whatever templates they were using to cut the neck had that narrow, 1 5/8 nut. Almost all the Kramer's beaks and strat heads of that time did. So they would have had to use a whole new template set, and therefore the headstock is similar but slightly different. That's why we get, that it's a little fatter.
It's thicker on the nut shelf, right? Too, and on the shape. Yeah.
So this is integral to the shape, and also this I think was different. But up here we get some differences, and obviously the logo is all like jacked up because whoever did it in a rush. But so yeah. Oh, and then the dot markers at the 12th fret are kind of shifted this way and wider. If we see this would be a standard Pacer spec. And you see they're a little wider and offset towards the bass side.
Oh, yeah.
So there are these small differences that I think just indicate that this was really a one-off neck that was meant to emulate and give him something he was comfortable with and used to using in the boogies.
Awesome. Yeah.
Makes sense. Total sense. Well,
But who knows? Like Chris says, it could be anything that was kicking. He had so many boogie necks that he never even used on.
Yeah, there was a lot of them. I saw them even, up in the later days. They were still hanging around up there.
Yeah.
A lot of them,
Yeah.
And that was well
We
after.
mentioned the Flying V yet?
We in passing, just that
Yeah.
he used it a lot on the record.
Definitely on Jump.
Yeah, Jump. Obviously, Hot for Teacher, Girl Gone Bad. So Drop Dead Legs.
Yeah, I mean that was such a significant thing, and the one thing that I can say about that from the one person that, and I mentioned this to you guys, there is a person that I know that had some privy knowledge of the sale of the Flying V, and according to him, and he's kind of a big dude in the vintage market. The pickups on the 58V were just unmolested PAFs, not wax potted. The pickup covers were never removed. The solder was still there.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that I know about the 58V was that basically it was stock, except he went crazy and did that stupid eyelet strap thing.
Well,
Oh God.
Yeah, of course. What's that?
No,
It's not like the burst where he took pickups out and stuff.
Yeah. I will say at that time that he was putting those, in 82, 84, the eyelets were small enough that he could probably have retrofit regular straps back in, because he was using those really small ones and they were using a flat washer to like protect it so it wasn't like gouging the finish out. So I don't know. I didn't see close-ups of that, but I saw
Ed's guitars, his vintage guitars, and he even said, "I'm not sentimental about stuff.
Yeah.
They're tools.
Yeah.
They're not like investments to be stored away and coddled and polished every day or whatever." He played them, and if he wanted, like I said, all the vintage Strats I saw that he had were all missing pots. They were all missing at least one pot.
Yeah, Donnie, well, we all know that whenever he picked up a Strat, because of Rosen's interview and because of the photos, every time he got his hands on a Strat, he just opened up the pick guard, pulled out the volume pot, stuck it in the position of the first tone pot,
yeah,
and went on his merry way.
Yeah.
And you see that on the Fair Warning black Strat, that Richard Aaron, I think, picture that Donnie and I love so much. That black Strat is set up that same way. The Kramer Pacer Deluxe that we were talking about on 1984 on I'll Wait, that is set up the same way. And I'm probably on pretty good ground that this is Donnie and I have talked about this. I think we're thinking he probably used that same black Strat for Cathedral and for the clean Strat parts, like the Hear About It Later intro on Fair Warning. And that one again, it had that same thing. He just, vintage Strats. He did that. And it's probably, and I've got to say this too. This kind of relates a little bit to the 82 package. So Cathedral, if he's using that black Strat, I don't know if you've ever tried to do Cathedral on a vintage Strat. Your volume knob is scraping up against the pick guard, and it is not the smoothest experience. It's hard for me to do that. I'm wondering if he might have even stuck a washer under there in addition to moving the volume pot to the tone pot position. I wonder, did he put a washer to make it rise up a little bit above the pick guard? Because when you're doing when you're doing that and you're going across the pick guard, I cannot play that song like that on
You're talking about the guy that took the hacksaw or the wood saw on
exactly to the
on the Melody Maker, Les Paul Jr., whatever it was.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, this is like an example. Here's a gift from BB King, right? To Ed, I don't know if you can go big here or not, but yeah, there you go. Okay, it's missing a stud. It's missing the bridge. It's missing the stop tailpiece. It's just like, hey, I'm gonna take parts off this thing. Hey, grab the BB King guitar. I need a tune-o-matic. Man,
I never played the thing.
The Les Paul Jr. with the Kaler is probably my least favorite.
That's craziness. and he did it pretty recently too, like in the early 2000s.
Well, it was post like the 90s photo shoots with the kind of grayish black background.
Well, when you need a part, you don't have the spare part. You take it off the other guitar.
There we go.
That's what you do.
There you go. Yeah, Chris, look at that.
There it is. Yeah.
And that's a Schaller. That's a badass.
It's a Schaller, yeah. It's
not a badass, 456 or something like that with the tailpiece.
Of course,
which is crazy because that part of the horn does not get in the way of anything when you're playing fucking slide. I have an SG and I'm sitting there going, why would he ever get hung up by this fucking point?
what was he,
Might have
was
been
playing with his
snowing in
arm like this or
California.
something, you know? It's just like, it's weird.
Yeah, you don't see Derek Trucks having to do that,
Yeah.
and he's up there in that Layla bird chirping land all over the place.
Or Dwayne or anybody, any number of, Warren Haynes, any number of people played slide on an SG. It's like,
That's
my
probably,
gosh.
a lot of people play slide on SG because it's so accessible, and
Yeah.
SG
Yes.
generally is so
It's a
accessible.
great story, guys. Come on, leave it alone.
Hold my beer.
I don't know
It's probably what happened was Valerie called the studio and like it's like, fuck it, I gotta take my aggression out on something.
Well, guys, I got to get my kids to bed. It's been great. I have to say, I'm going to just sign off and say, Jim, thank you so much for everything you've done for all of us. You drug this caveman right here into the digital modeling age. Never thought that was going to happen. You did it.
I never thought I would do it.
You may be the only man who can get Alan to listen to 90s Van Halen.
Wow.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
Yeah, we'll see. That's a challenge, Tanner. Right there. There's my
Definitely
challenge.
a challenge.
all right, buddies. I'm always harassing you through Messenger and everything. Thank you for putting up with me. You guys taught me so much. I am so grateful and indebted to every last one of you guys. Thank you so much. Cheers. Good night. I'll see y'all next time. It's been great.
Thanks,
All right,
Alan.
Alan, take care, man.
Bye, guys.
And we're gonna wrap it up now too. I mean, Jim's probably pretty burnt out from all of this.
Oh, no, we're going to keep going. Are you kidding? No. Sorry.
Yeah, Jim, we're just getting started here.
You know what? That's fine. I'll just start drinking.
But I just want to thank you again. And listen, I'm sure you're going to be getting messages and questions from all of us. There was already one in here.
I really do. I try to answer as many as I can. I mean, I really do. And you guys especially. Yeah, if you're having issues, you're trying to get to something. Yeah, ask me about it for sure.
Yeah, well, we can't wait to dig into this one, especially me that 82, 84.
Remember what I said though, John. This one's different.
Yeah.
It's cleaner and it's not not quite as easy to play. So just be aware of that. And
I totally I'm expecting that. I figure you got to manhandle that guitar like he did. You could see him even at that Donington. He was like that solo. You could see his hands are like, and you know what? In the later years, obviously he got tired of like manhandling guitars. He's like, it's too. I want to make it easier. So let's gain, baby. You know what I mean? It's just
He didn't though. I mean, he never really stopped. I mean, he always
he never stopped manhandling. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, he was always like a ton of force. I hate to see how many pounds on the fretboard and the picking hand and everything. He was definitely.
If you watch me play, that's the way I play too. It's like I'm hard on I pick really hard. I dig. You know
why? Because that's what you were raised on, that plexi, and that's just the way people that were. I wasn't really as much as you were, but people like you and Ed and Chris, people plexis back in the day. That's just the way they were. You had to, you had to. You make it. You listen to that sound, and anytime I hear that tone on 1984, I'm like, oh, it's clean with sustain. But that sustain is from him, his fingers just like freaking making it, wrestling with that thing, to make it sound that way.
And so I keep stressing that because I'm a little concerned about this one getting out in the wild because the guys are going to say, it doesn't sound like it, or it's too hard to play, or it's because you actually got to work the guitar a little bit to get those sounds. It's just not automatic. There's a whole ecosystem you got to do, and it's your hands. There's a big part of it that's your hands. So.
Yeah, you got to play with it. Yeah, that's it. But then at the end of the day, we can always put a little gain on there too, right?
That's why I say feel free to experiment. Turn the gain up a little.
That's it, right? Well, that's great. Well, Jim, thanks again for everything, everybody.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Go out and get this, and any questions. Pass them along to us or Jim. Any major questions like that? Maybe if he gets a chance, he'll answer them. But I want to congratulate you on this. This is an epic feat that you accomplished. No, it really is. I mean, you made things so much easier for all of us to just sit there and just turn this on and just start playing, you know what I mean, and have fun, you know what I mean?
I'm glad everybody's loving it. So far, it's a big hit, and I'm thankful as hell that it is, because it's a hell of an endeavor. That is for sure.
It really is. Yeah. So thank you again on behalf of all of us Ed heads out there. We really appreciate all this. This is great. And thanks for coming on tonight. And thanks for everybody watching. And everybody go out and get this. It's awesome. That's all you can say. And thanks to Donnie, Chris, and Alan, and Jim for coming on. We appreciate this. And, maybe we'll do it again down the road here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Jim.
Good
Thanks,
stuff,
Chris.
guys.
Guys,
Thanks, guys.
talk to you guys.
All right.